So in traditional Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, I mentioned earlier one of the markers of stream entry, which is the first level of awakening in the Theravadan tradition, is the dropping of personality view. Many people take this as a communication that the personality is going to go away. And that's not accurate. The personality is very intricately structured within our psychology and our body. And we unwind from that. We, let's say, purify the beliefs and convictions we have in the components of the sense of self for quite some time. It's not till very, very late, very deep in realizing the absolute. As I mentioned in the book Demystifying Awakening, what I consider to be or the Zen tradition considers to be the final or full enlightenment, the Daigo Teitei, only then is the sense of self dropped or put down and not picked back up. So that's a fairly deep and rare realization. So it's not common. So that's why understanding that the personality, the mechanics are going to be working for a while. It changes with realization. Our conviction in the personality, in the beliefs and convictions about the personality soften, and some of those drop along the way. So our commitment to the sense of self gets weaker and weaker as we progress on the path. So just understand, though, there are times when the personality will be present and activated. Even for those who have had the Daigo Teitei realization, even though there isn't a sense of self asserting itself, there still are the patterns of behavior of the self that haven't been purified yet. So there still could be behaviors that are incongruent with the realization that's carried. And it just is an ongoing process. There's a never-ending process of purification of whatever isn't ultimately true. And again, that just is our path. That's how we do it. So I want to talk a little bit about how the self is structured. One of the most primary levels or beliefs in a separate sense of self, of a me, starts when we're infants. The theory of identity that I use in my teaching, that I find to be the closest to what the experience is Margaret Mahler's dual unity model. And in this model, we're born into a unity of presence and love. The absolute, the oneness I talked about earlier, is a part of the infant's experience. The infant doesn't have a sense of I'm separate, I'm a me. They see themselves as a part of the undivided wholeness, as are their caregivers and everything they can witness. And remember, the infant doesn't have language yet. And if the infant doesn't have language, it doesn't have concept. So concept will begin, nonverbal concept, as more and more the infant begins to wonder if they're separate. And that starts some of the structuring. And so for a period, the infant is in the oneness, and it's called dual unity because there actually are caregiver and infant. The infant doesn't perceive the duality, yet it still exists. It perceives only the unity. But over time, the infant who has a survival instinct, an instinct to stay alive, that survival instinct will begin to get activated when the infant is hungry and needs food, when the infant wants to be changed or held, loved, whatever the need is. And the caregivers not being perfectly attuned to the infant, which caregivers can't be. The child has the period of time where I'm hungry and I'm not being fed. I don't have food. And so in that gap, the child begins to wonder about this unity. It kind of becomes a question mark because the survival instinct feeds a kind of urgency to the hunger or the need to be changed or held. And clearly we get, as the infant, that we're not able to produce this. I'm hungry and I can't produce food. The food comes from the caregiver. And I need to have a relationship. I need to maintain a relationship, a positive relationship with this caregiver in order for me to stay alive. So the body boundary becomes the first level of identity, because we recognize that when we kick the edge of our crib and it hurts our foot, we know that we're the ones feeling that discomfort or pain. So we begin to get a sense, oh, okay, I'm here. I'm in this physical location, and whatever's on the other side is not me. So this begins the separation, the individuation that the infant makes. And this is why one of the most core pieces of identity is the body boundary, non-conceptually held, because it's one of the first identities we make. So our sense of self is built upon, constructed upon this physicality, this body boundary. I am this body. I am what's within this body. From the skin in is me. That's a fact. So that begins the building. And then we start recognizing again that we need to keep these caregivers engaged. We need to have them maintain a positive opinion of us so they will attend to us. We're not convinced they'll attend unless we do things that they find to be satisfactory, that we behave in ways they approve of, we conduct ourselves in ways that are within the norm for our birth family or our society. And so that starts all the structuring. And then as we get feedback, as we're mirrored by our caregivers, when they are happy or delighted by us, we begin to recognize that as a behavior we want to repeat, because it keeps us in good relationship with the people that are keeping us alive. And then on it goes. And as we start exhibiting, we learn language and start being able to engage with others with language. Then we start learning likes and dislikes. They have preferences. We have things we're good at, things we're not good at. All of that gets mirrored and reinforced in a way that we begin to form an identity. Okay, this is me. I'm somebody who likes to do this kind of behavior. I like this kind of activity. I like these foods and drinks. I like these people and not those people. So we begin to form a sense of self that way. And as our inner dialogue gets more pronounced, particularly the likes and dislikes, as our preferences, as we narrate them through our life, we reinforce this sense of self as we go through the day. Oh, those flowers are awful. That person is ugly. The sky is beautiful. We start finding these ways of positive and negative reinforcement. But all of that comes down to I'm me. The problem that we have is that when we break this intimacy with the presence and love, the unity that we're born into, interestingly, each of us holds that split, that break, as a rejection. We feel that we were rejected by the Absolute's presence and love, when in fact we recognize as part of our survival instinct that we need to bond with these caregivers. We need them invested in us and our survival. And we recognize they're not looking from this same place of presence and love. So I need to adopt the family viewpoint, perception. And we start doing that. And when we turn away from the absolute, again, we take it as a rejection. I was thrown out. I was sent away. And we hold it that something must be terribly wrong with me for love to kick me out, to turn away from me. And that begins the structuring of what I call the core wound. And that is a very deeply felt wound that I am irretrievably, irrefixably, if that's a word, broken. I'm damaged at my core. And that core wound becomes the motivation for us to create a socially acceptable personality, because we don't want people to confirm our core wound. We carry a conviction that if they see it, if they know that we have this core wound where the absolute rejected us, they're not going to want to be in relationship with us. They're not going to help us survive or thrive. So we construct this personality of all the things we're good at. In various families, people get assigned certain roles. I don't know if you've tried this before, but it's really interesting if you have a family gathering to watch the way your family interacts, to see how people view you, what role they think you're in. If you're the eldest or the youngest, there's a certain expectation. And when you behave in ways that don't match that expectation, it can create a ripple in the family flow. Everybody is surprised that you're the smart one or the funny one or the emotional one, and you're not doing that. It's unnerving for them because it makes their role in the family less secure. So the families will often really work to ensure that you take the role that you're assigned, that you've agreed to. There's a contract, a social contract, that you'll be this particular person, and now you're not. When I was doing my own process with this many years ago, it took me years to not habitually fall into the certain character that I was in my birth family. And again, everybody was very invested in me staying in that role. If I tried to step out, people would sort of push in a way that trying to get me back in that seat. So it takes time to really break away from some of these identities and some of the social relationships we have with those identities. But this is part of the process of awakening. We follow the compass of truth. We look at our behavior, we track our behavior, and we look for the places that we act that are over the top. They're disproportionate to the situation. It's the easiest place to find behavior that's no longer congruent. I give the example often of going into a restaurant and being served a glass of water, and there's a big lipstick stain on the glass. Do you calmly and logically and rationally explain this to the waitstaff and have them bring you a new glass? Or do you have an overreaction of anger and accusation? Do you feel unseen, invisible, not cherished by getting this dirty glass? And so you lash out at the waitress or the waiter about they've offended you, they've hurt you by not seeing you. So this is where we start, by looking at the places that we overreact and understanding why. How come that was such a strong reaction? I felt completely invisible, unseen. I needed to be seen. I needed to insist on the waitstaff seeing me. And I felt I had to do that from the anger. I felt like I had no strength at all. I wasn't here. And so this is where we start tracking our behavior. But this is true both pre and post awakening. We want to watch our behavior. We want our behavior as much as possible to match our understanding of what reality is and who we are, knowing that it's changing all the time. But it's an ongoing process. So this is part of including our personality and personal work in the spiritual journey. I was interested when I first started Buddhism with the perspective Buddhism can hold, that with a realization like the Buddha's awakening, Buddhists often will hold that all of the personality material, all of the dysfunction and misunderstanding we carry will be purified, will be righted in the process of realization. I don't personally think that ever happens. I do hold the possibility maybe for the Buddha, his realization was so tremendous that perhaps that's what happened. I don't think it's actually true there either, because having read many of the Buddha's suttas, his sermons, I've seen places where it seemed to be cross with somebody or upset with somebody about something or other. And so there was little flashes of upset. So at least patterning was still arising, that he was wanting things to be a certain way. There was an investment in them being a certain way. And I'm not going to get into a discussion on the Buddha or what his realization was, but just to say, in my view, knowing the number of teachers I know, I don't see any of us that aren't still subject to patterns arising that need purification. So there are times when the teachers are going to act in ways that are not, that don't appear to be the most harmonious and realized. And this is why, if they're doing their work, if they're still working with a teacher or a peer, then they're going to engage it and they're going to investigate when they react in ways that are not in congruence with their realization. And it's an ongoing journey. So I want to put it out there that don't hold the ideal that there's a perfection one can have where you're never going to make mistakes, you're never going to misunderstand, you're never going to do things that you regret later. It's part of being human. It's part of living in the conditioned world.